Thank you, Don and Emily, for making time to be with us to talk about music, this ongoing conversation you've been having. There are a couple things that I think launched this desire for us to talk today. One is this book, A Song to Sing, Life to Live, came out in 2005, if you can believe it. And I feel like really lucky because I feel like I've been eavesdropping in on your conversations for a long time, because this book in many ways is a conversation. And a lot of the questions that it raises, at least for me, are being resurrected in this time of quarantine. Questions about the blurriness of boundaries of sacred and secular and all of these things. But then the real reason we're talking is because we have a new book,
Yay!
Which is very, very exciting. I think Emily and I are very much today are celebrating the release of this new book, Theme and Variations, Music and Imagination, Don Saliers. I thought actually, Don, maybe you want to say a bit about this book first, since we're really launching and celebrating this book.
Okay. Well, I am so happy about the book because it represents the ongoing conversation with us and the conversation with so many, including you, Tony, and so many others. I'm happy because this book has been written slowly. It's a series of essays meant to be sort of reflective and trying to get people to think about music and moral imagination, music in our life, music in our spiritual life. And in that sense, it's a direct continuity with what you and I talked about then, wrote about then. So I'm very happy with it. It's a series of short chapters, so you can pick the book up and read it backwards or from the inside out and so on. So,
which I think is kind of ideal right now. I don't know about you all's attention span, but I have trouble sitting down and reading for like hundreds of pages at a time. 3 pages of really profound stuff and a few questions, really perfect for right now. So I think even though you obviously wrote this over time, not for this moment, I think it's perfect for this moment. So congratulations, it's really exciting. And then the book that preceded it, do you want to say a bit about that?
Sure. I can't believe it was 2005. It just doesn't seem that long ago, but it did. Dad and I had co-written an article for a periodical, and I think it was geared towards youth, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The first one we did, and then we were asked if we would consider writing a book about music and spirituality. And so really how it started was a conversation. Dad and I would sit down over coffee, and back then I think it was an actual tape machine, and we pressed on record, and
I think it was.
and then Dad had a wonderful student who transcribed it. But what we really did was just talk about how is music connected to spirituality in our lives? What's the difference between the Saturday night music world that I come from, that Dad would have come from, I think, if you weren't called to the ministry and to liturgy, and how his dad and my grandpa was a professional touring musician,
right.
So. But how music, either in a club on Saturday night or in church on Sunday morning or a synagogue or whatever, how it informs, bolsters our spirituality and questions like that.
I'm really interested in this question right now because it feels like all of the binaries that we've tried to draw over time are really being complicated in a particular way right now. Like, we're at home all day. Even church-going folks aren't hopefully going to church right now in terms of like physically going to a church building for their own safety and the safety of others. But it feels like sacred and secular are all blurring together even more than they have before. And that's one thing I loved about this book, is that it started to raise that question in a deeper way. I don't know, Don, what did you learn from writing this book about that division?
Well, so many concrete examples came to my mind in writing this book when I talk about imagination. There are all kinds of imaginations, and I've learned so much from Emily over the years, especially writing the first book. But for example, a small church in Tennessee has a musician come out and play a dulcimer, play an old folk song that in some ways you would say that's not a religious piece, but suddenly in the context of an online worship service, that thing took off, and I found myself almost weeping over the quality of it. And so I think one of the things that you and I have talked about a lot is the quality of music, no matter what its origin. And so when YouTube and Bono start to work on psalm things, and someone says, "Oh no, YouTube, that's a secular group," No, you can't hold to that distinction anymore. And then I think historically, for the nerds out there, there have been these periods of time in which something that starts seemingly worldly and secular becomes very much at the heart of the religious musical vocabulary too. And that's a historical fact. I'm not making that up.
Yeah, for the nerds in here too.
Yeah.
The other thing I've been thinking about is our changing relationship with music in these past months. I know that Don and I have both been invited a lot to talk to like choirs who are really lamenting the inability to gather. And although sure they can listen to music online or whatever, that physical act of breathing together and making music is absent. And although there are many more losses than that right now, I think it's worth naming that kind of lamentation. And I'm wondering these past months how your relationship with music has changed, both like materially, like how you make it has changed, but also how if you think about it differently at all.
Well, I know that as soon as Amy and I, as soon as Indigo Girls had to cancel shows back in March, we immediately wanted to do a live stream because we just had such a desire to keep playing music, and we felt really bad that people had bought tickets to come to shows, and our shows are really joyful occasions. And so we did this live stream, and we just played like a normal set, maybe a little bit shorter, of songs, and it was very simple and so on. And we had no idea during the live stream there were like tens of thousands of people tuning in, and not only tuning in, but speaking to each other in the community. You know, oh, this song reminds me of, or remember when we went to this show, or, you know, I'm feeling so sad about blah, blah, blah. And we were dumbstruck by how profound that connection was and how music was needed to provide that, you know. And so we hear a lot from our community, and many people lament the lack of live music, you know. They're tired of looking at a screen, but, you know, I figure we have to do the best that we can with what we have. And it's better to have music on a screen or virtually than not have any at all. But I think everybody is in their spirits and bodies hungering for live music again.
Yeah.
I know I am, not just as a performer, but as a fan of music.
Yeah.
And because there is something energetically that happens in a room where music is being played and shared. And there's nothing in life that replicates that.
That's right. What about you?
Yeah, well, that's well said. I can't add a whole lot to that, except that I have been interested in how my attention online has concentrated more on certain aspects of the music than if I'm just live. When you're in a big place, say a sanctuary or a concert hall, there are all kinds of things going on simultaneously.
Right.
But suddenly when you're focused online, you're paying attention to the sound and also to the gesture of the music. Now, I'll tell you what I miss. I miss being live with, say, a string quartet, you know, or you guys. And what I love is the kinetic interaction that's there in the room. And as performance, you and I both know, and Tony knows, you really count on the energy of live audience, live interaction. But what I'm just rediscovering is how much of the sound is visual. How much of the hearing of the sound. For example, especially I think in string quartets, where you have this passing back and forth. You have a string player will lean in on another person or sniff for a downbeat, and that's part of the complex. I think I've noticed that more, but I miss it more. So there's a kind of paradox in our online musical life right now.
Interesting.
So
that is interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. For as much as there is loss, these online things have also made things possible, like the communication of the fans, almost like exchanging thoughts and greetings and sometimes prayers, even worship services online, people actually able to give voice to their pleas in the midst of the service extemporaneously in comments boxes.
Well, your question also reminds me of the fact that I've been called upon to visit choirs in their gatherings, I've been asked, I've probably done a dozen of these around the country. Someone will say, please come and talk to our choir. We don't rehearse live, but we meet. We want to gather. And so the topic of lament starts out. Yes, we lament that we can't do this. But then you start talking about music making and not only memory, but future hope when you're back together again. And so in many cases, it's a kind of reintroduction to the power of music. Mm-hmm. And so that's done online with the choir, and then the choir gets to respond voice by voice, and we do it. And it's a miracle that we can do that.
Yeah.
I guess I want to say that.
And yet, even with that,
even with
without
that,
the live, there's just a sense of being in exile.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
right.
a good thing.
From the place that you love.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and for the theological nerds, it's an eschatological hope. we hope there will come the day, and I find many of those choir directors end our sessions by saying, and we will soon be gathering together again to learn these pieces and sing them.
Yes.
Yeah. But there also is interesting because of communication powers. Choirs can learn things over the
right.
Individual parts and so on.
Right, which is still not the same. But absolutely. Yeah, I talked to a choir a few weeks ago, the Glenn Memorial one, and I think someone said that they'd be even willing to sing a hymn they hate right now, as long as it meant singing with other people.
As long as they can do it, yeah.
Because the song itself didn't matter to them. They just wanted to engage in the practice.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if y'all are drawn to any particular music in these past months, like out of the ordinary, or like have you been gravitating to any like meat and potatoes music, new music, things that have helped you process, make sense of things?
That's interesting. I always try to keep in touch with what's going on in sort of my genre and field of music, but that's like, obviously Amy and I are not hip hop or rap artists, but I like to keep in touch with what's going on in the hip hop and rap world, or in the Americana singer-songwriter world. And so, I even look at charts, or but mostly I get recommendations from friends, and then I check out their albums, and sort of a grassroots way of spreading it around. But there hasn't been one particular style of music I've been gravitating to. More for me, I've had an urge to create new music. And I'm just struggling with the technical learning curve. Because that can eat up a whole day of creativity before you know it. But I am finding that what we're going through drives an urge to create.
Yeah. Have you had the time to do it?
A little bit. Busy home schedule. My wife has a busy career, and we have a 7-year-old, and school will be virtual, but we're piecing it together, and we have it a lot easier than a lot of people who either have several kids or both parents have to work, or a single parent, so we're privileged, so we're able to work out those kinks.
Amazing. What about you, Don? What have you been drawn to?
That's a really good question. It should be asked to everyone who's seeing this. 3 things have kind of been part of my listening. One is I do go back to places, musical places that are vibrant and give me life. And for example, I've been trying to relearn the Beethoven piano sonatas. I said relearn because I once played them fairly well. and memorizing the Bach inventions, I'm in the process of doing that. That's one kind of thing. Another thing is that I'm rehearing music that I haven't heard for a long time, which is a great comfort, because suddenly you realize these are gems, these are treasures of human emotion and the human imagination. The one thing that I've done that's new is listen to music I haven't heard before, and I find in that, for example, Goretzky. I mean, who listens to Goretzky? But that 3rd symphony of his suddenly just galvanized me when I listened to it, almost as though for the first time. And there's an aria in there, Mother Don't Cry, but the background of that is the Holocaust. And so suddenly I'm put in touch with the suffering of so many people through a music that I haven't really digested fully. So that's going on with me a lot. And a lot of it goes back to folk music. I mean, all of the spirituals and all of their arrangements and so on. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child is very prominent to me right now. If you think of all the children without their mothers, or mothers who lose their children, that music encodes that for me. So that's been kind of prominent in my listening right now.
Wow. The other thing that runs throughout both books, but maybe especially this more recent one, is this question of music and memory. Like, and I don't think anyone has done as much, at least in the theological side of things, to help us think about that. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how your thinking on that has evolved in these recent essays.
Oh yeah, and there is a lot of that in this book, and it's I guess I'd start by the sheer power of evocation. Sometimes it's just association. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as they're singing our song. and so a lot of talk about, well, that's the soundtrack of my life, and I'm glad to hear it again. That's kind of at a certain level, and it's true of many people, and I wouldn't want to take that away from anybody. But then there's also how it is that music encodes the way the world feels, and the double mystery of, I remember feeling that way, and then this gives me a chance to have access to my own memory feelings that I haven't had for a long time. Now that can shade off into therapy, music as therapy, but more I'm finding that the complexity of our emotional life requires that we know something by heart. I have an essay in here on knowing something by heart. In fact, I think it's the lead essay.
Yeah, I think that is,
yeah. And what is it to know something by heart and then improvise on that so that the heart keeps growing in its compassion and to use a musical term, its repertoire, what our capacities are for human connection. So that's one of the places where I think memory, not just as remembering something that happened,
right,
but oddly enough, remembering my own future. I'm going to live more deeply into this. I think I bring it up a couple of times, or at least one of the times, is Mahler's Kindertotenlieder, which is a classical piece about the death of children, and how that music has given me a chance to lament and grieve with people I've never met, but also asks me a question. Are you capable of grieving with the world yet to come that will have its laments, and children will die, and so on and so on. So the music encodes that both as memory and as a capacity, an empathetic capacity for others. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like a musical anamnesis.
It is.
Remembering into the future.
Again, anamnesis.
That's beautiful. So thinking about that, they're playing our song. I'm really interested in this idea of songs that repeat and repeat and repeat, and it happens both in the church, but it also happens in an Indigo Girls concert. And I'm wondering how you feel as an artist about that song that everyone wants to hear over and over again, like Closer to Fine or Galileo, Power of Two. Like, is it a grind or is it delightful? How do you make it new each time?
Well, Closer to Fine is new each time because someone, either the opening act will come and sing the last verse, or the particular crowd that night will take a verse, either the second or the third verse. And so it's different every single night. There are other songs that get requested a lot. I'll give an example, like Power of Two. For some reason, I'm not able to play that song every single night, even though we get a lot of requests. We play it a lot. But Closer to Fine, I could play every single night because it really changes.
Yeah.
And it's like a hootenanny sing-along.
Yeah.
So, but honestly, Amy and I feel such gratitude for just being able to do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And we make a new set list every night of songs, and we don't play songs we don't want to play. And even sometimes we'll be in the middle of a show and someone will yell out a song like Ghost, for instance, of mine, and Amy will look at me and she's like, well, that's Emily's song, and she'll look over at me and I'm like, nope,
Not happening.
not tonight. Because if you sing a song that you don't feel like singing, then you're invalidating an experience. You're not being authentic to the expression of the song. I mean, it'd be like playing music just for money, which is just a horrible thought, you know. So.
Oh my goodness, that's a radical idea.
I mean, I take a paycheck. I'm not complaining.
I know.
But so we keep it fresh with gratitude, with making a new set list, with not doing things we don't want to do, and we're just so grateful for our community who's there at the show. So, and honestly, both Amy and I feel as enlivened about music, as passionate, as interested in growing and listening and writing as we did 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm really thankful for that, because that's not something you make up.
No.
You either feel that way or you don't.
Right. That was me that yelled out Ghost, by the way.
Well, sometimes we do it, but not every time.
I'm just kidding.
And one of the things I like that you just alluded to is when your audience is singing, and I love the expression on your faces, because you turn to them and you hand it over, you give the music over, and it just reflected on your faces. Even when you're singing in the studio, and you come to a place where there are about 10,000 voices singing in different keys out there.
Yeah.
But I love this theme you just put, and that's gratitude. I mean, how do human beings develop a sense of thankfulness for life? And if music can't give that to us, then I don't know, other things will, but I just think one of the great powers of music in church and in concert halls and in bars and so on, awaken in us this deep notion of we're thankful for something. Something has been given to us as a gift. And I think that characterizes your music as gift. And if I may say so, Tony, a lot of your settings strike me as a gift to a congregation. It's what I hope for my own music, whether it's organ playing or accompanying hymns.
Yeah.
There are times when I'm accompanying hymns and the congregation is singing vigorously, and I say, I am so grateful for this music being sung by these people.
I was just going to say, along the lines of the experience of music, it's not a cognitive and intellectual processing experience. So in that sense, it really breaks down barriers, because if there's the sermon going on, then you're taking in, and there's the preacher, and you're working it through your mind and your heart and spirit as well, but not to the same degree where the music comes. You're not breaking it down and going, well, there's the choir and this is happening now. It washes over you. Yeah. And so that is a great power of music. It's the great equalizer. Everybody gets to just bask in it and be taken away in it. We all have our own experiences that are tied to the particular pieces of music, but just the physical experience of music is something that levels the playing field in the most beautiful way.
Oh yeah. And nobody walks out humming the homily, as I've heard it said before.
I've never heard that. That's a good one.
Sorry, preachers. But music does allow you to kind of like say things that you might not be able to preach. It does allow you to, I think, tell certain truths even that maybe a homily does not allow you to tell, which is another interesting thing that comes up in both books, this idea of music and truth-telling. Yeah. And music and justice, and that's the other thread that I heard in this gratitude conversation, because I think an impoverished understanding of gratitude could just lead you to, well, I got mine. But a deep sense of gratitude, like, I think pours out and desire for others to have and others to live in a more just society. I wonder if you could maybe reflect on that a little bit.
Oh, now that's a segue to a long discussion of how do communities pour themselves out for others, and what is the relationship between, for example, doxology and ethical impulse and the impulse to serve. I'm not sure it's one of the essays in here, but I was thinking about how people always want praise music in church. Ultra bright Christianity for me. I don't want any of those sad things and so on. So I began to study forms of doxology in the Psalms. Not unique to me, but suddenly I discovered that where the praise is most intense, for example, in the ending Psalms, 146 through 150, the great doxological ending to the whole thing, there's so much in there about ethics, about the poor, and about pouring oneself out. And so it occurs to me, and there are a couple of essays in the new book like that, in which I say you can't have praise unless it's connected with this giving of oneself over to the things you're most grateful for.
Yeah.
And of course it's also connected with the relationship between, if you can't lament well or grieve well with another person, it's going to be hard to celebrate well with them. So the relationship between doxology and lament is reciprocal, and that sometimes occurs better outside of church, I have to say, than in church. And I think the church can listen more carefully to those forms in which songs from another place pour out a life for others. And that's one of those places where there is, going back to your earlier point about reciprocity between so-called secular and so-called sacred.
Yeah, that question fascinates me. The maybe overgeneralization that all people like happy music in church, but yeah, I think it gets at a truth, right?
True.
It's generally true in a lot of denominations, and I find that interesting because in popular music, so much heartbreak. It's like, okay, so did we put all the heartbreak over here or what? I'm wondering about that kind of strange thing, and like you said, what we can learn, those of us who part of institutional churches, about that longing in people. Maybe some people left the church because there was no room for the heartbreak and to tell the truth about whatever.
Yeah, how can I come to this assembly with my broken heart and so many broken hearts and not hear a word about it? Yeah. That's really something. I have, as Emily, there are these jokes about Indigo Girls songs. There's always this earnest seriousness about real things, and real things are happening. And if you guys sometimes joke about it, you'll say, well, it's just another Indigo Girls happy song.
Yeah, lighthearted song. Yeah.
And,
clearly not the people that requested Ghost.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, but I think this is a profound issue that we haven't thought enough about.
Yeah.
And I think discussions of music, various musics, one of my favorite things for church folks, and it's related to hootenannies really, is to have an informal hymn sing in which people can sing their so-called favorites and tell a story about them. Intergenerational, because young folks learning something new that the old folks don't know. It's good for the old folks to hear the stories from those young people about why they love that thing and what does it say to them.
Yeah, and intercultural too.
Exactly, and that's where we are now, is that the church is finally opening its arms and ears and voices to global music, so you're really singing yourself into another culture. I'll never forget something you said in our discussions. And you said something like, I know I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
that's okay.
She's here, she can defend herself.
Yeah, you can take it. You said something like, if you hate the music of another person, that's pretty close to hating the person.
Yeah.
Or the cultural context.
Yeah.
So here we have this larger discussion about how do you sing your way into understanding without being tokenist, without being sort of noblesse oblige. I'm singing your songs.
Yeah.
And learn from that. I'll never forget the examples that you gave in our discussions.
Well, I think now it's especially true in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement and the racial struggles for Black and brown people in this country, and how it's tied to colonialism and what happened with Indian peoples in North America. And I think that judging music harshly and therefore judging peoples harshly is the same problem with racist thought. Is like a generalized opinion about a group of people, not looking at the systems that affect people, but just saying it's the people. And so I think it's an opportunity for people to open their minds as they, like, I'm reading a gazillion books on how to be an anti-racist and, as much as I can, and talk about only being able to read it in chunks, like a little at a time. But the more I read things like that open my mind to, it makes me less apt to accept the generalizations that my mind tells me about things. Yeah. So that's kind of like my hope for people in music, is to open your mind to the experience that people have through the type of music that they choose to create or listen to.
Yeah.
That reminds me of something that I've been involved in a lot of retreats. And one of the exercises that we sometimes do is to avoid one-storying people. I know your story. I know what you like. I know your emotional life. Right. But music can really wean us away from that notion of, I understand you because you sing this and have this rhythm. And then you suddenly encounter something else in a song. Yeah. And you say, holy smoke, I didn't know it was, you were so complicated.
Yes.
Like me. And then you say, oh, I'm complicated too. And so are you.
Yes. Man, that happens with young people all the time in the church, especially. Young people like fill in the blank. I'm like, which ones? From which backgrounds? People are complicated. Yeah. And you just get kind of this hegemonic answer to everything. Right. It's like, people are complicated, A young woman who plays cello in the orchestra and then sings mariachi at home and listens to pop music, Yeah. These complicated biographies. So, and then music and justice. I mean, one of the things that so impresses me about Indigo Girls as a group, and you and Amy as individuals, is you don't just put on benefit concerts. You actually live lives really committed to making the world a bit better in the ways you can. And I'm wondering, where does that come from? Does it come from mom and dad? Does it come from...
No, I mean, really, we were reared mom too. Yeah. It was a very simple principle, which is that we're not isolated, we're members of community. And it's important that we look out for each other. Yeah. And we were brought up and introduced to a loving God, not a punitive God. And so a loving God who is a healer and a caretaker, that just the understanding of God that I grew up with. So activism is just a natural extension of that. And it's not that Amy and I are the healers of the, a lot of times we're just the liaisons between us and maybe a community that needs a voice given in a certain circle or whatever it is, because we are not solving problems for communities. They are solving their own problems, and we're just carrying the message out. But it isn't a natural extension of just being in community and a loving God. For me, I can't answer for Amy about that, but for me.
Yeah. And were there musical mentors that you looked up to, like activist musicians, as a kind of a model for that? Or?
Not so much. I mean, we had Peter, Paul and Mary records around and different activists, but no, most of my activist mentors were not musicians. They were just people who were doing really hard work. Yeah. At the expense of their own personal lives or relaxation or whatever a lot of us get to have some of, Right. So I was just inspired by their courage and and they're designed for grassroots activism and things like that.
Yeah.
One of the things that's impressed me, and again, this is back to the fact that these books come out of real live discussions,
Right.
is how well you have listened, the two of you, and it shows up in the music. Listening to the sound of someone's voice in a different situation than your own. And I think that's what the church types, for me, and any moral community, has to learn how to listen. I was just thinking, I wrote an essay in here about Pope Francis's Laudato Si, and there in that case, he wants us, like so many good teachers, wants us to listen to creation, wants us to listen to the loons, wants us to listen to the trees, wants us to listen for the symphony. In my walks recently, I've been noticing how the cicadas are coming on, at least in this area, and they are very loud.
Yeah.
And I keep wanting to say, what are they saying? What are they saying? Some people walk by frog ponds and they hear the voices of the frog chorus, and others pass by crows, and the three crows sit there scolding you, and you say, I hear you, I hear you.
Yeah.
But it's more important to hear human communities. And
Is it?
well, maybe not. Good question.
I'm just
listening
curious.
to
I've
you.
been thinking about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great
Yeah,
question.
no, that's a very good question. How can you listen to creation? How can you listen to other people without listening to the environment in which they live?
I guess we could say it's as important.
Yeah,
As
let's say
important.
co-equal. And I think Laudato Si, I have to say, is co-equal on that.
Yeah.
You can't think about creation without thinking about the poor, and you can't think about the poor and how to serve them without thinking about the environment.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you played me a recording of a loon yesterday for like a full minute.
Oh,
We're just
yeah.
amazed.
Yeah.
What
yeah,
an
the
incredible song.
Cry
Yeah.
of the loons. Yeah. So.
It truly is. And so, I mean, so much of this new book is about paying attention. I mean, it feels very Mary Oliver, actually.
Dear Mary Oliver, we praise you.
What a compliment.
Yeah.
We thank you, Mary Oliver. Yeah, pay attention, please. And it starts with, for example, when I used to teach music lessons to students when I was working my way out of I was in graduate school, but on Saturdays I would go out and teach students. And there's always that business when I realize they aren't listening to their own playing very well. They're trying so hard to play it. And then the magic day comes when they say, I hear it. And sometimes you even get something like, it's playing me. It's like the music is playing me. And that transition for a music student is one of the magical moments.
Oh, yeah.
It is.
It comes again and again and again.
Yeah.
So
Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. Well, thank you all so much. This has been so good.
Yeah.
I think especially for these choirs who are in isolation, any musicians, your new book is so helpful because it's actually full of questions. So you could break them open with your choir and think about them in this time where we really long for the time when we can get back together and sing.
Absolutely.
We were, in our house, it was all about questions. I really appreciate that about Mom and Dad, and you've heard me say this, that we, even after going to church and coming home, we sat around the table, we were allowed to ask questions like, well, how can there be a Trinity? I mean, you can't have three things that are the same thing. And, well, how is Jesus God?
Yeah.
Or is God God? And, I mean, we were younger, but we were allowed to ask these questions.
Yeah.
Dad and Mom are like, well, you can't, I can't imagine growing up in a household where religion was just dogma and doctrine and no questions were allowed.
Yeah.
Without questions, it wouldn't be fun to be a person.
Right. And I think that's the thing. I mean, clearly as a parent, but as a teacher, that you do so well. I mean, you open up questions. And I think I heard someone say once after a seminar that you led, he's such a generous scholar. And I thought, what a great compliment. because there's lots of smart people
That's
out
the
there.
truth.
Well,
But a generous scholar tries to pull out from others, what's your deepest truth? How do you see this?
He was like that. He has always been like that as a father.
Yeah.
So.
this is getting very embarrassing.
Sorry, I'll stop. I'll stop. Tony, you stop too. We'll stop.
Okay.
Anyway,
Thank you.
well,
I
I-
want
Yeah.
to say thank you.
Okay, all right, I accept that. Thank you. And I want to thank Tony. Thanks for this
Yeah,
conversation.
Tony.
And
We
my
talk.
hope-
I'm going to embarrass him now because we talk about Tony Alonso
We
in
do.
our household
Yeah, that's true.
behind your back. All good things like that. Tony Alonso, isn't he something awesome? So there you go.
Yeah.
Oh, y'all. Don, any closing words?
Music is the language of the soul, made audible. It contains life-giving. The ordered sound in music, whether it's vocal or instrumental, orchestral, or the sound of a hammer dulcimer, contains the mystery of our life. It really does. And if to my dying breath, I will say that, and I want to make that clear to myself and to others, because it is absolute gift. Martin Luther says it's the greatest gift next to the Word of God. Okay, all right, Luther. But there are a lot of other smart cookies that said that. So I just want to go back to the basics. That the reason I can write a book about music and moral imagination, or music and theology, or music and memory, is that it's this great gift in all of its variety.
Amen. Thank you so much. We got to get going because you got to start working on the next book. And you got to start working on the next song.
That's right.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dad.
Bye.